Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew chapter 20, beginning at the first verse. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire labourers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the labourers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again at noon, and at about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And at about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the labourers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired at about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. And when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." This is the gospel of the Lord. If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. This is the complaint against Moses and Aaron of the people of Israel in the wilderness. Maybe some of them simply said, "It's not fair." Think back to your childhood or the childhood of those around you. It's not fair. Do you remember hearing this or even saying this? It's not fair. Jason's parents buy him new stuff. Why do I have to save up for what I want? It's not fair. He gets to watch TV while I do the dishes. It's not fair. I can't go and play with my friends just because of this stupid sniffle. It's not COVID, you know. Every child has said it, often wailed it with a sense of outrage. And it's not just a cry of childhood, and it's not wrong for children or adults to rail against the lack of fairness. It's not fair that. You can fill in the blank and finish that sentence with your own unfairness, just as well as I can. We are all born with an innate sense of fairness. It's a powerful and wonderful thing, because that sense of fairness, when developed into maturity, is the foundation for justice and equality. Our innate sense of fairness can lead to a strong and life-giving sense of justice. But not always, because too often our innate sense of fairness tends to be somewhat egocentric. Too often we tend to assess fairness in terms of what seems fairness not only to us, but also for us in relation to others, which is sometimes a selfish point of view. How did God respond to the complaints against his appointed leaders in the wilderness? In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. "What is it?" they cried, for they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." Which brings us to Jesus' parable about these day labourers. Before I start, it's important to recognise just how tough it was to be a day labourer in first century Palestine. These are folks with no regular employment, and so must stand in the town square hoping that some landowner or manager needs extra work done and will hire you. Ironically, not unlike some hiring practices on the docks of Australia's ports within some of our lifetimes. The trouble is, more so in first century Palestine than in early 20th century Melbourne, there were usually many, many more labourers than work for them to do. And there was no unemployment benefit or social services to fall back on. So if you were both healthy and lucky, you got chosen. And you could work a 12-hour day. And when you were done, receive a day's wage that would provide food for your family for the next day. If you were unlucky or unhealthy, you'd be passed over, possibly waiting all day only to return empty-handed to face the disappointed looks of those who depended on you for food and shelter. In the parable Jesus tells, everyone gets lucky. Some are chosen early, some more late in the morning, at noon, at mid-afternoon, and some just an hour before quitting time. No doubt those in this last group were not just pleasantly surprised by their good fortune when they received a full day's wage for an hour of work. They would have been stunned, I'm sure. Not, let's keep in mind, because they hadn't wanted to work all day. After all, they'd been there just the same as the others, ready, willing and eager, but they'd been passed over time and time again, until right near the end. And so I suspect they were delighted to discover they would be able to provide at least for one more day for their families. The way in which this act of generosity is acted out, however, sets up expectations. Seeing that those who started last received a normal pay for the whole day, and they received it before the rest were paid, those who had worked all day would have been wondering how much more they would receive than they'd originally contracted for. Thinking from a fairness framework, it's hard to blame them. After all, if those who worked just 1 hour got a full day's wage, wouldn't it be only fair to give those who worked 12 hours, 12 long hours, more and maybe even a lot more? That's not what happens. They receive a full day's wage, no more, no less, just as they were promised. They are disappointed, even angry. It just doesn't seem fair. But the landowner reminds them that he's being more than fair, actually downright generous to those who were invited late in the day, as well as perfectly fair to those who were fortunate to be called to work early. Why then, he asks, begrudge such generosity? Why indeed? Except that that's human nature. Fallen human nature, true, but human nature nevertheless. This parable is not told in the framework of the Fair Work Commission of the 21st century in Australia, but we should be wary of trying to put that framework into our understanding of the teaching of Jesus in this story. What Jesus was talking about was human nature. Human nature that tends too often, through its own insecurity and lack of trust, to come to understand and assess our lives, not through the abundance we have been given by God, but instead by what we feel we lack. Because of this gnawing sense of lack, we define ourselves in comparison with and against others, comparing and begrudging their good fortune because it wasn't our good fortune. Rather than feeling fortunate to have found work for the day, the grumbling day labourers felt unfortunate at not having received more. Rather than rejoicing that these other workers who waited all day with ever-declining prospects of work could return home blessed to be able to feed their families, they begrudged them their good fortune, perhaps even cursed them. And rather than being grateful to the owner who had given them an honest day's wage for an honest day's work, they could only grumble with resentment. There's a dimension to this that speaks as truly in our own day and time as it ever did to Jesus' original audience. Because this parable lays before us a stark question. When we look at our lives, do we count our blessings or our misfortunes? Do we pay attention to the areas of plenty in our lives or what we see as what we lack? Do we live lives characterised by gratitude or by envy? Do we look to others in solidarity and compassion, or see them only as competition? Sometimes it seems that we are incapable of being grateful and envious at the same time. So too often it boils down to a question of which is it going to be. Jesus was eventually killed precisely because he offered this choice. He was crucified not because he proclaimed that the grace and mercy of God was available, like the bread in the wilderness, to all, even to those deemed incredibly unworthy, but also because his declaration revealed the hardness of heart, the stone-cold entrenchment of spirit that is, in too many cases, part and parcel of the human condition. His inclusive, boundary-breaking generosity revealed the envy and competitiveness of those in power. His vision of another way of being in the world, which he characterised as the kingdom of God, revealed the lie told by the protectors of the status quo that theirs was the only way. Shamed by such a vision and unable to embrace it, they put the visionary to death. Does this have to be the way it is, always? Are we condemned to keep on crucifying Jesus by the way we live and the way we relate to others? Surely not. Surely we can learn to see this blessing in Jesus' way, the rightness in Jesus' abundant generosity, despite the fact that by the standards of the world, that way is not fair. Surely we can learn that there is something beyond fair, which is not only just, not only simply right, but is uplifting and ennobling, and which blesses those who embrace it and who embrace the one who came preaching, teaching, and embodying this new life of the kingdom. The one who was willing to die that we might see and believe that this new life is possible. It's possible in abundance and more generously than we can ever imagine. The Lord be with you.